Welcome once again to Cinemaholics. I'm John Negroni. I'm the box office columnist for Atom Tickets, head writer of Cinemaholics.com, and I occasionally write books. He is a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend. He also reviews films for Cinemaholics.com. It's Will Ashton.
Hi, Johnny.
What was that?
I was like
was
a
that
mix.
Supposed to be Shining?
No, I was doing a mix of the Tim Curry Pennywise and the Bill Skarsgård one. Because like the Tim Curry one kind of reminds me of like a rodeo clown from like the 30s.
Where he's like, "Hiya, Georgie."
Yeah, hey, Georgie.
Yeah,
come on down to the sewer with me. You'll float. And then the Bill Skarsgård one is like, "Hiya, Georgie." And he's like saliva's coming out of his mouth, and I don't feel like either version is really like what I imagined him in the book, which is just like, "Hey, Georgie." It's just like not
like more of a smooth talker. Like,
right? Yeah, because he has like a kind of like a beguiling presence, and I feel like I don't know if either of these versions. Well, I like both performances. I don't know if either of them would really lure children.
Wow, so we're just already into this review. Like, this is a record for how quickly we just jumped right into it, huh?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, okay, before we start talking It Chapter 2 and a whole lot of other movies, you can find more episodes of Cinemaholics, including our full archive on cinemaholics.com, and write into the show anytime by sending us an email, cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com as always. And if you want to become a patron and support us directly, you can always check us out on patreon.com/cinemaholics, find about some of those perks and ways to be a patron. Okay. Like I said, a lot to talk about. We've got some emails to go through. We've got a whole bunch of movies that you and I have seen in the last really 2 weeks because we did our fall preview episode and we didn't talk about any movies we'd actually seen really in that episode. But we did get some emails and we want to talk about maybe one or two. Well, I know it's been kind of a hectic week and, we recorded that fall preview episode like, I guess 2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah, just about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so we did it like before a whole lot of crazy stuff happened. TIFF is going on right now, so there's like a whole bunch of stuff, and I wish we had time to get to all of it. And we'll probably give it another week before we start talking about the Toronto Film Festival and some of the reactions out of that. But I'm hearing stuff every day about tons of films. Like just this morning, I was seeing that Knives Out apparently is really good, which is great to hear. And Hustlers, which I'm glad because we're going to be talking about that on the show sooner rather than later. But we did get an email from a listener, and this one was about our fall preview episode. This comes in from Bradley, and Bradley took issue with some of the films that we didn't pick. I think this was an error on our part, where we were a little bit like we didn't emphasize strongly enough our time frame for the fall preview. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, because he pointed out a whole bunch of films and was like, we didn't bring up a whole bunch that unfortunately they're coming out in December basically. A lot of these films, or they don't even have a release date, so we didn't talk about them. But they're films that we're obviously like everybody else looking forward to. He mentioned Big Time Adolescence, Uncut Gems, Little Women, Hidden Life, The Mountain, which I think already came out, Marriage Story, Light of My Life, 1917, Nimic, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which is at TIFF right now, and I think that's one of the ones that doesn't have a release date. Varda by Agnes. It's December, okay. Varda by Agnes, Bombshell, Come to Daddy, Just Mercy, Richard Jewell, and Color Out of Space, another TIFF one that, so that one's just, I believe, hitting a bunch of festivals, and will probably be a 2020 movie. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, that just premiered, I think.
Right, and so Bradley wrote in and said, sorry to just name a bunch of these films. There's no mention of any of these, and which isn't true. We did mention Marriage Story, but we mentioned it in the sense that it's not a fall release as we define it. But there was no mention of any of these, and as a it's
theatrical in November, which would fit in our time frame.
And we did mention it, so yeah. And as a longtime listener, I'm just pretty shocked and disappointed. I know you guys have better taste. But man, branch out a bit. So kind of annoyed, but I guess, our fall, like we said this in the episode, maybe we didn't say it enough times or like emphasize it strongly enough. The way we did the fall preview, the time limit was from It Chapter 2 all the way to the end of Thanksgiving, which would be the end of November, right? Which is why we didn't talk about any December films. And I know there's plenty of films we didn't get to that do fit in this time frame. And I don't know, I read this email, we responded and everything, but I feel like, we did talk about some really interesting films that are all over the place in our fall preview. I mean, it was a 2.5-hour episode.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know how anyone can leave that episode wanting more from us talking, but I mean, I guess there's always room for discussion. But yeah, I think one thing we try to do on the show is we do try to vary it as far as we talk about the main run films, but we also try to talk about a lot of indie films that we see or that interest us or that we want to check out. So we do try to strive for that balance, but if we are kind of leaning too far into the blockbuster side, I can understand. But at the same time, that's blockbusters are still cinema. Like you can't ignore that, like these huge movies are coming out. And often the huge movies are what draws people to go to the theater and helps the studio sometimes hopefully fund some of the smaller movies that we'd like to champion that are on the more artsy side. So you kind of have to find that balance. You can't really just talk about one side of the equation over the other, unfortunately.
Well then, and also we each picked three films for our most anticipated of the fall, and none of them were blockbusters. So it's,
Right.
like you could say like 2 of them are kind of mainstream, or maybe even 3 of them, in the sense that like they're more popular movies or not like indie. Like we picked movies like The Lighthouse, Parasite, Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, Irishman, and Irishman's probably the closest you can get to a blockbuster, right? But yeah, we weren't. It's not like, I don't know. I think the listener just like misheard us or something, because he made it sound like our most anticipated films were Frozen 2 and Last Christmas, which, reading that, I was like, okay, clearly there was a gap in communication there. So hope that clears things up for other listeners who might have been wondering the same thing, who might have heard the episode and been like, why are these fools not talking about some of these incredible films that are apparently coming out of the festival circuit right now? And that is the reason why. I don't think we missed anything too big. I'm sure we did here and there, but like Where's My Roy Cohn was one that, like a documentary that I almost consider. Like there are little things here and there. But that was from Bradley. Thank you as always for writing in. And yeah, did you have any other thoughts to add?
Oh, I mean, the only thing I was going to add was I didn't realize it until after the fact, but one I wanted to talk about was Mr. America, which is the spinoff movie from On Cinema at Cinema, which is the show Tim Heidecker and Greg Turkington do on Adult Swim. So that was one I missed, and I guess that would be an indie film as well. So that was an oversight on my part.
I did watch that trailer for the first time because you mentioned it, and it looks pretty hilarious, but I don't know. I don't know if it looks good.
I'm surprised you're able to follow it. Yeah, because there's like literally like hours of like prerequisite for those characters, and I don't know if you can really. I'm very curious to see audiences who aren't at all familiar with the universe go into that, because it's just like I don't know if you have to do the homework to understand it, but it's going to be like a lot of like context. So I'm very curious to see how that film's going to turn out, and also to see what the audience reception is going to be like, because it could be a very, very niche film in that regard.
Let's talk about some films we have seen, and we did have another email we want to get to, but it involves one of those films that you saw, Will, but that's not the first one we're going to get into. The first film this is the one film I think you've seen recently that I have not. So Where'd You Go Bernadette? This is a film that came out a few weeks ago, and it was like August, mid-August, right? Annapurna Pictures, Cate Blanchett, Richard Linklater. This should have been the biggest film of August. It wasn't. It kind of came and went. But Will, you did get a chance to see it. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, I mean, as we mentioned on the past couple episodes, it was one that was on my radar, but not as much as I would have hoped, just because, I mean, obviously, the talent involved, Richard Linklater in the cast, Cate Blanchett, Judy Greer, Billy Crudup, Lawrence Fishburne, a whole bunch of others. Kristen Wiig, that's the other one I'm forgetting. It's a pretty strong ensemble, and it's one of those films that when it wasn't getting that much buzz, it was very much a cause for concern, because it's like, like there was at one point, I think there was like some like Oscar consideration, like, or like buzz, like, hey, is this going to be award season contender? And then when it came out in mid-August, that seemed to solidify that those chances were fairly unlikely. And unfortunately, Where'd You Go Bernadette is a lesser Linklater film, in that I did read the book, and I think it's safe to say that the book by design is very uncinematic. It's mostly compiled of different emails and post-it notes and like magazine articles and stuff, as far as a kind of like collection of what happened. And the movie's more straightforward narrative can be very choppy in that regard, because it has to make it a like streamlined narrative. And I think something that gets overlooked about Linklater, maybe not so much nowadays, but he likes a challenge. I think it's very apparent with movies like Boyhood and this, that he likes to kind of push himself, even though his style can be very casual and conventional. He likes to do something different each time. And I could see the appeal when this was being auctioned to kind of make it like a little bit like Big Little Lies meets Gone Girl. Not quite as dark as either show, but or either show or the movie, but something in that kind of like mom lit vein. And I think just the tone never gets the tone quite right, because the comedy, it's kind of sitcom-y. It reminded me a lot of like an ABC comedy, because his more sentimental approach waters down a lot of the intended satire of the film. And I think the way that he is able to try to balance the emotions at play with the comedy never quite finds that balance. But I very rarely find myself feeling like a Richard Linklater movie is not worth the time invested. I think he makes very agreeable, enjoyable, and ultimately likable films, even at his lower points. I think the cast here is really strong because he just really knows how to work with actors. And Cate Blanchett, while her kind of more theatrical style can kind of be in contradiction to the kind of casual style that Linklater has, kind of similar to how Bryan Cranston could sometimes feel a little out of place in his last film, Last Flag Flying. I do think there is a lot of emotion here. There's a lot of heart, and the newcomer, the girl who plays her daughter, I don't know her name off the top of my head, but she's also quite good as well. And I think it's like
you're talking about Emma Nelson.
Yeah, Emma Nelson. I think as a film, it's just more of a middling misfire. It's not something that is outright disagreeable, but it doesn't really stick with you. It doesn't have the emotional impact that a lot of the other Linklater films have. And in the end, it's fine. It doesn't really do all that much, but it's not, like I said, an unlikable film. It just kind of settles in a way that never really finds its groove, unfortunately. And that was just more disappointing than anything else. But in the end, I gave it a C+. Like I said, I wasn't mad I saw it. It was interesting to see Linklater try to do something different, even if he didn't quite get it right this time. And in some ways, I feel like when he doesn't quite get it right, like this or Bad News Bears, it's a little more interesting because his style seems so effortless when it works that I think, appreciate it more when you see it when it doesn't work. Because it's like, if he's able to make it look so easy, like, he's a truly gifted filmmaker. So with that, yeah, it's fine. And I should also note that I did film a scene in the movie that was ultimately cut. I think John jumped to conclusion a couple weeks ago.
I heard you'd been seen in the film. I was ready to jump on that hunch.
I know. What I said was, I heard that my scene is in the film, and John jumped at to be, you're in the movie. So I just want to clarify that I'm not in the movie, unfortunately, but I was on set for Richard Linklater movie, and for that, I'm pretty grateful.
Where'd you go? Scene with Will Ashton?
Yeah, where'd I go?
Yeah, but yeah, I'm very bummed to hear that it is a middling misfire, as you put it, because I agree with your take on Linklater. Richard Linklater, though, I mean, he's one of my favorite filmmakers, and his films really are agreeable. They really are just feel good. He's made some of the best films I've ever seen, and when I hear he's doing a film, I want to get excited, and I get a little, and I hear Will Ashton's in it. It's like, wow, this is what 2019 is all about. And then I hear this, and it's just such a bummer. But yeah, critics were pretty mixed on this one, but it was a total flop. I mean, audiences had no patience whatsoever. It came out the same week as like Good Boys and that shark movie nobody watched and all that. And it's $18 million budget. It's only made $8.7 million worldwide. I mean, that is just that's pretty bad. And not even talking about marketing costs.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna say, it was like the same kind of weeks that Annapurna was like almost bankrupt too. So I don't even think they really were able to get the word out when the movie was coming out. So it was rife with misfires altogether in every pretty much sense.
Yeah. Well, that's Where'd You Go Bernadette. I don't think it's in a lot of theaters still. I think you have about
it left, I think, yeah.
You have like maybe an hour or two to see it before it's gone, and it might already be gone with that. So
Yeah,
unless you live in
I know.
Seattle, it's a Seattle movie. So
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it was filmed here, and it left when It Chapter 2 came out, so I imagine it's not playing much of anywhere at this point.
well, we have another film here that not a huge not a huge release or anything like that, and that is the movie Luce, which I've talked about on this show a couple times. This one hit a limited theatrical release in early August, and this is one of my favorite films of the year. Will, you finally had a chance to see it, so we thought it would be great for you to weigh in as well, because I gave the film a whole lot of praise. I really love the movie Luce. This is the film from director Julius Ona. He, of course, did Cloverfield Paradox, and this one stars Calvin Harrison Jr. and Octavia Spencer, Naomi Watts, Tim Roth. Will, where are you at with Luce? What was your take after seeing it pretty recently, right?
Yeah, a couple weeks ago. I enjoyed it. Yeah, I definitely liked it. I'm really glad that you steered me to see it, because I don't know if I would have checked it out in theaters otherwise. And it's the kind of film that you don't really see much anymore, which is like, it's a very character-driven film where the stakes can seem kind of low, but they're also very high. And it's very much just a kind of bottled film with people talking out their problems and kind of trying to not come up with an easy answer for often ambiguous situations. And I definitely enjoyed it. I definitely could tell, though, that it was based on a play I saw at the end, and I was like, that seems right. Because when I was watching it, it felt like a lot of it was kind of structured to set around like certain sets. Like a lot of the scenes kept coming back to the house in kind of random ways, or the school. And yeah, in that sense, like I don't think it's a smooth transition to the screen in that regard. And I don't know if I was quite as taken by the ending as you were, just based on what you were saying about the film earlier. But I think as far as the performances are concerned, it's really quite strong. I was definitely taken by who's the actor who played Luce. I've seen him in other things, but I can't think of his name.
Calvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely ran the Obama comparisons a little thick at the beginning with him, but yeah, I definitely thought his performance was stellar, and I'm really excited to see what he does next. Also, Octavia Spencer, I think this is one of her best performances in a while. Between this and Ma, she's having a pretty good summer as far as the performances are concerned, at least, because I know Ma wasn't a great film. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I don't know if I'm quite at the A grade that you're at with it, but I'd give it a solid B plus.
All right, yeah, I love the film, and yeah, I like how compact it is with the sets. It was like a claustrophobic feel that really resonated with me personally. We did get an email from someone who I think likes the movie a little bit like slightly less than you, maybe. This is from Steve, and Steve said, "I saw and pretty much liked Luce, though not as much as the reviewer, Will, I think." Of course, that was me. And it reminded me very much of the film Doubt, in the sense that the film battled the viewer back and forth as to what might be the truth, the motives, the ethics of all parties. So what did you think of that? Do you think the Doubt comparison is pretty valid?
Yeah, that's definitely a film I thought about. That's another play that was turned into a film. So I definitely, yeah, that comparison is pretty sound, I thought.
Yeah, and Steve also mentioned Peanut Butter Falcon, who he says, "I saw and liked the Peanut Butter Falcon, called it feel good, buddy road movie. Pretty generic all through, but also quite winning." So I had the chance to see Peanut Butter Falcon, Will, pretty recently. I'm sorry I missed it, but I am planning on checking out sooner rather than later. Hopefully by the time we talk again.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call it generic, but it is fairly formulaic, which I think is maybe what they meant. And yeah, I could see in that regard.
Those are like synonyms, right? Like generic, formulaic. It's kind of there's similarity there.
I feel like I think you can be formulaic without being generic. I think you can be generic while being formulaic, though. So I don't know if it's an easy comparison in that regard, but
it's like a Venn diagram.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, I think there's enough in it to not make it totally generic, but I do think the plotting of the film, it definitely follows like a 2007 Sundance kind of route that some people can. I mean, it's not a film where it's like there's like a huge mystery as far as what happens. You can. Once you get like the puzzle pieces, you can figure out where it's going to connect together. But I think the emotion of it is really what worked for me. It's just such a heartwarming film with performances that really feel resonant and lived in. That to me is what really worked with the film. But yeah, it definitely is a fairly formulaic design as far as its story structure.
Okay, here's another film you are just catching up on that I saw a few months ago, The Nightingale. This is a film that we have been wanting to talk about in more detail on the show for so long. And finally, it came to Pittsburgh. You were able to see it. Mm-hmm. And I'm excited to hear what you thought about it. The Nightingale's a horror film from Jenna Kent, who, of course, directed The Babadook. The Nightingale's a really tough movie, a film that I definitely like a lot, and I definitely have a lot of appreciation for it. But where did you land on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely... I don't want to say it was, like, excited to see it, per se, because when I heard what the subject matter was and what the film was going to entail, I was very nervous to experience it, because I knew it was going to be a tough sit, and I knew that, it was going to be a harrowing experience, to say the least. But I was very excited to see where Jennifer Kent was going to go next, because I thought her debut, The Babadook, was like one of the best directorial debuts I'd seen probably this decade. It's just such a well-made movie, and it had such great performances, and it had such clear style and vision that it just was apparent to me that she was a filmmaker on the rise, and I really wanted to see where she went with her second film. And she really took a swing in a totally different direction, still in the horror genre, like you said, but in a very more grounded in realism way, whereas The Babadook was very much kind of a fantastical look at something that's very real and serious, whereas this movie is 100% grounded in reality in a way that is unflinching and definitely, as you said, a tough, hard sit. But the filmmaking and the craftsmanship of the film, I think, is quite good. And I was really taken by how the film was able to very narrowly, I think, avoid being an exploitive film. I could see how the subject matter will definitely prevent people from wanting to see it, and that's totally understandable. But I think the film, it avoids like the quote unquote like rape revenge story tropes that you would see, in a way that it keeps the humanity in focus. I think the way that the film is able to keep that ground in reality while still being a fairly engaging and heartbreaking film is really a testament to how confident and talented Jennifer Kent is as a filmmaker. And I think she puts a lot of thought into this. I think the way that she conceives the film is very thoughtful and considerate as far as what she's trying to tell. And I was very taken by how well it was made and how much the emotion of the film, particularly towards the end, hit me. And I would say it's not a film I really want to rewatch, but I think it's one of the best films of the year. And if you're able to see it and you can sit through the film, given the subject matter, and I would definitely encourage that people read what the film entails before they see it, just so they know. It's film that it once again makes me very excited to see where Jennifer Kent goes with the rest of her filmmaking career. And for that, I'm going to give it an A-.
An A- from Will. Yeah, I was more of like a B+ on it myself, but we should look at... Yeah, and it's been fluctuating, because I really like this film, and there's just some things about it that I'm still wrestling with. I actually want to see it again, and this definitely feels like another film that will probably hit Netflix at some point, kind of in the same way Babadook did, and that's the way a lot of people discovered the Babadook, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Sam Nolan, though, absolutely loved this film, so I want to bring up his... so Sam Nolan, of course, staff writer for Cinemaholics.com. This is one of his favorite films of the year. He gave this, I think, an A, because he gave it like 4.5 stars out of 5 on Letterboxd. But yeah, he called this quite possibly the most humanly brutal and intense movie I've ever seen, which I take pretty seriously, because Sam has seen a lot of brutal and human movies. And I think
he just watched all those Manson movies too. So it's not like he's saying that lightly.
Yeah. So The Nightingale comes with high praise from the Cinemaholics crew, and myself included. I think it's a watch. It's a good watch if you know what you're getting into. I think that's the thing that I struggle with the most. This is a film so many people just walk out because for reasons, we don't need to double over, but that's The Nightingale. Definitely an interesting film, and one that you might be able to still catch in some theaters. I don't think it's in a lot at this point. Yeah, but it'll definitely hit streaming at some point, and that'll be a pretty accessible way to watch it and stop watching it if you feel like that's what you need to do. So that's The Nightingale. All right, and then another film, but oh wait, no, this isn't a film. This is a comedy special. We haven't done a comedy special in a while. We both have seen this. This is the new Dave Chappelle special, Sticks and Stones. Dave Chappelle is a controversial comedian, I think, is being pretty generous. This is a guy who is not afraid of making jokes that people aren't comfortable with. And this is a special that has been in the spotlight kind of infamously because of a lot of his jokes tackling the Me Too era, cancel culture, the Michael Jackson accusers. And it's a mixed bag of some really appalling, but also some funny stuff. What did you think of this special, Will? Because you don't watch a lot of specials these days. I think that's pretty true.
Yeah, I don't, not really by choice. It's just, for some reason, I don't get around to watching a lot of comedy specials. Maybe because it's probably the Netflix formula, which is that Netflix makes things so accessible and so like easy to find that I never, well, not easy to find, but like easy to access that I just often feel like, oh, I'll get around to that one day. And pretty much like 95% of the comedy specials I'd want to watch have just slipped through the cracks for me because I'm just like, I'll get to it someday, and I just never do. But with the Dave Chappelle special, and the same goes for his past 4 specials, they're all been like, oh, I'll get to them someday. That still haven't gotten to them. But with Sticks and Stones, it was one of those specials that got so much comments and notice online that I was very curious just to see where I would land on it, because it was a lot of people talking about the jokes, but you know, you kind of have to watch the comedy to really have an opinion on it. You have to kind of see it to gauge where you stand on it. And I think kind of similar to what you're saying, I don't think it's his best work. I think he's too talented of a comedian to make an outright bad special. He knows what he's doing, and I think there is a point to it. I don't think he's just trying to poke buttons just to get a rise out of people. I think he's trying to make a broader commentary on what he perceives comedy is going to be, but I just don't think the material comes out quite as thoughtful or as nuanced as what his better specials have produced. I think he's been, fairly progressive as far as what he's trying to do, and certainly with Chappelle's show, he tackles, like you said, a lot of comedy subject matter that is kind of dicey, but the way that he's able to approach it in fairly thoughtful and considerate ways, I think, is somewhat lacking in the special. Like, there's definitely moments in here where I think he shines again. Like, I think the Jesse Smollett bit is, like, that's Dave being Dave. I think that's...
You mean Jesse Smollett?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's strong. There's another bit in here I'm blanking on that I think was pretty good. But yeah, just like some of it just feels like he's kind of trying to get a rise out of people in a way that it's kind of frustrating. It definitely reminded me of that Simpson bit where it's like, am I out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong. I thought about that a lot while I was watching it, and that, I don't know, some of it just, I don't think he fully believes everything he's saying in here. Some of it feels like he's kind of playing into like a character, and I don't want to say that's true or not, because I don't really know, because I don't know Dave Chappelle, but just based on the epilogue that they had at the end, it seems like that kind of clears the air on like how he feels about a lot of the subject matter. And so I don't know if it's quite as bad as some people are making out to be, but I do agree that it's not top tier Dave Chappelle by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. Where I stand is that I think that ultimately this is a guy with an opinion, a bunch of opinions, and some of them I think are pretty ridiculous and stupid. Like, this guy just says some things that I think, and like you're saying, maybe it's on purpose, but he says some really stupid stuff. And the thing that bothers me is that people will watch this who share some of those awful opinions, even if he doesn't really have them, and they'll feel validated by them, and they'll use them as sort of, like that validation of making themselves feel better about basically just being jerks and bad people. And to say that that's what this entire special is completely inaccurate, because it's not. There's a lot of really funny stuff here. There's a lot of good stuff in here and a lot of it's really harmless. But yeah, after watching the special myself, I was watching it on a plane. And it was hard because there were times when I wanted to laugh, but I was like, I don't want somebody to see me laughing at Dave Chappelle. No, I'm joking. I just laughed. But you know what I mean? It's like, it's almost like liking Dave Chappelle is like you're committing some sort of atrocity. And honestly, I honestly think that if
that's
you
a bit of a stretch.
Is it, Will? Is it because there are people
Yeah,
coming after Dave
it's a
Chappelle
stretch.
fans, you know, who are, if you even say that like you like his comedy and you are willing to watch his specials, and like people find that, like, you know, to be a big problem and that you shouldn't do that. And but I think that he's the kind of
just this
person.
special. I think it's just this special. I don't think anyone's retroactively canceling the Chappelle show. Like,
Maybe not the
I haven't
Chappelle
seen
show,
that.
but at least the previous Netflix specials, because that's where a lot of this started. And I'm just kind of giving off like my impression, right? So I just
Sure.
look at him as a comedian who here, and we talked about Aziz Ansari pretty recently with his special, and I didn't love that special because it just didn't feel as honest to me. And this one, at the very least, I feel like we're getting a version of this guy just kind of being himself. And I think that if you don't like that and you're offended by it, like you probably should be, and probably just, you know what, you shouldn't feel bad about that, and you shouldn't feel guilty for not wanting to deal with this like 40 something guy who just does feel kind of out of touch. But at the same time, I mean, it's, you know, if people are watching a special and they're liking it and finding it funny, and it's giving them a kind of just like a quick escape, then, you know, there's something to that too. I just kind of find myself not really caring at this point. I really don't. I don't really care what Dave Chappelle thinks about Michael Jackson and his accusers, because, you know, it's the sort of thing where it's, if you can watch Leaving Neverland and come away from it like not believing the accusers, that's your problem, not mine. And I think that that's pretty much settled. So that's kind of where I stand on it. And again, funny stuff in here, but ultimately it's kind of indicative of a guy who really is kind of like losing relevance. And to me, it feels like he's sort of like gasping or grasping for it, which is crazy because like he's a great comedian. He doesn't need to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like he could do really funny jokes without, you know, doing this sort of thing. But if that's his philosophy, that it's not about the jokes being funny, it's about being controversial and about starting conversations and all of that, then all power to him. That's his decision as an artist, and it's everybody else's decision if they want to watch it or not. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is something to be said about how the conversation around the film is sort of feeding into his hand, about like people who aren't watching the special but hearing what he said and outright deciding to cancel him. Is that kind of proving his point? And I don't really know exactly, but I will say that there are some parts in the special that I did get the sense that he kind of felt like more high and mighty than like, or he felt like comics are more high and mighty than they might actually be. Like at one point, I remember he kind of vaguely implies that the new abortion laws are because people can't take a joke, quote unquote. And it's like, I don't know. It's not really comedians' role to determine like how abortion laws play out. Like that's kind of a high and mighty, self-important stance to take. But yeah, as a special, yeah, like you said, there's funny stuff in here. I got some laughs out of it. And like I said, I don't think Dave Chappelle can, I think he's too talented, too good of a comedian to make something that's completely without merit. But yeah, it is kind of annoying to see someone that clearly a lot of people have a lot of reference for kind of going against what they like so much about Dave Chappelle. But like you said, this is his choice. This is what he thinks his comedy needs to be right now. And I'm sure, given all the attention here, that Netflix is going to give another special. So I don't know if the next one's going to go even deeper in this direction, or if he's going to kind of push back and go kind of similar to what he did in the early 2000s. But we'll see.
We will see indeed. All right. I'm going to talk about a film that you have not seen. So this is the one thing I've seen lately that you have not. And this is American Factory, which is a documentary that has just recently released on Netflix. It was directed by Steve Bogner and Julia Reichardt. It's about this company in Dayton, Ohio called Fuyao. And so Will, do you know anything about this documentary before I kind of talk about it?
I have not heard of it.
Okay, so in case you haven't heard of like what happened here, so in the late 2000s, General Motors shut down this plant in Dayton, Ohio, and it left out all of these people of a job. Like thousands of people lost their jobs, and this was during the recession. This was during when Barack Obama was just becoming elected president, and I bring that up especially because this film is actually being distributed by Barack Obama and his wife Michelle Obama, the First Lady. Their production company, Higher Ground Productions. So it's kind of like we heard about this like pretty recently that they've been doing these films for Netflix, and I don't think this is the first one, but I think this is the first one I've seen that I am making that connection. But regardless, the story here is about this community in Dayton, Ohio, when after General Motors goes away, General Motors is obviously this American company. Like it doesn't get more American car than probably General Motors and Ford and all that. And the savior to these people, these people who need a job, ended up coming in the surprise form of this Chinese company called Fuyao. And Fuyao is this company that makes like these glass windows, like the windows that go on like automobiles. And there's this billionaire who decides that in China, who decides that he wants to unite the East and the West. He wants to take his company and create a factory in America, hence American Factory. And this documentary goes through a whole bunch of years and like how that works. Like, how is it that a Chinese billionaire can start a factory in America with American workers, and the struggle between the Chinese people trying to train American people and then the culture clash. And then like there's a scene where these American factory workers, who are kind of like the heads of like their different departments, they go over to China and they go over to the factory that's actually like doing well, that's making a profit. And they see the work ethic of the Chinese, but then they also see the horrors of how there's no safety, how these people get like maybe one day off a month. And there's just no way for them to like to figure out how to do the same thing in America. And it's a fascinating documentary that, you know, like the movie The Farewell, which came out pretty recently, really gets you to open your mind a little bit more to the good and the bad of our different cultures, and how, you know, on the one hand, what I like about this documentary a lot, especially, is that it is even-handed. I mean, it explores the downsides of American workers and how sometimes we just have issues like being open-minded to new ideas, or being open-minded to people telling us what to do when they're from another country. And a lot of the conflict in this movie is like these Chinese people, they leave everything in their homes, their families, their wives, everybody. They move to America to train these American workers, and the American workers, a lot of them are very hostile to them. And they feel like, especially as the years go on and the recession, the desperation of that time goes away, they just can't see this as an opportunity for connection. And there is actually a character who does forge like a friendship with one of the Chinese workers, and it's a beautiful thing. But then, you know, I won't give away what happens, but needless to say, I mean, it's kind of a bleak documentary in a lot of ways. And a lot of that bleakness comes in the fact that, yeah, this factory just isn't able to come to our standards as Americans on how workers should be treated. There's a lot of conflict over whether or not there should be a union. There's a lot of conflict over safety standards, like I mentioned, and there's a lot of conflict over what is the role of a worker in a factory, especially when things like automation are really on the horizon. And it's kind of a tough documentary to watch in that sense, but I'm glad I did, because it was definitely very. It was definitely one of those, you might hear like, oh, Barack Obama, super liberal, right? And it honestly, it really isn't. Like, it doesn't really take any stances politically. It doesn't portray policies or anything like that in any light beyond things that I think a lot of us take for granted, things that are kind of set in the sense that, yeah, like people shouldn't be like on their knees picking broken glass out of a mountain of glass and putting it into buckets. That's just like inhumane stuff. But from our perspective, right? The only downsides from this documentary is that it just does feel like it's not really leading anywhere, because it doesn't really take any stances. It doesn't really lead anywhere with any declaration, or it doesn't seem to have like that thesis statement that is really great when a documentary can kind of pull that off without feeling like it's talking down to you or preaching to you. It doesn't quite have that. It really does feel like we picked up a camera and we followed this factory for a whole bunch of years. And the other downside of that is they didn't film a lot of the years in between the early days of Fuyao and the latter days, because like there's a lot, the film kind of jumps in time a lot, and it doesn't hold your hand sometimes to its detriment, because it can be a little confusing. Like there's a thread that goes along this movie, and then it's only at the end that you realize that it didn't happen until like way, way later, but it's kind of deceptively edited to make it seem like, because they like edited scenes of like, this is the happy scene, so it goes with the other happy scenes, but the timelines are totally off. So there was some stuff like that where I was like, it's kind of rubbing me the wrong way. It's feeling like you're just sort of, manipulating information in a way. And that kind of bothered me to an extent. I think that was clearly an effort by the filmmakers here. But yeah, all that said, still very much worth a watch, especially if you have that in mind. It's on Netflix right now. It premiered at Sundance, and I wish I had seen it then too, because it would have been great to talk to people right after seeing it. I've been itching to talk to somebody about it because there's so much brought up here. But yeah, if Will, this is one of the ones that I think that you should check out. You should not just say, I'll get to that eventually. This isn't one of those. This is actually a pretty good documentary for you. I give it a pretty solid B. Okay, so that's American Factory. What are you thinking? Are you thinking you might check this out?
Maybe, yeah. I was thinking, so I didn't realize that the Obamas had their Netflix deal already in place. Like, I thought that was still in the works.
That was the thing I wasn't sure about.
What was that?
That was the thing I wasn't sure about. Like, if they had already started. But yeah, for sure they're on this one.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was kind of hoping that there would be a Barack Obama Netflix comedy special in the works, but
it's called Luce.
Coming up later. Oh, wow. Oh, man.
One man play. Oh boy,
that would be something. Yeah.
So that's American Factory. We just have one last film to talk about before we talk about It Chapter 2, and that is Brittany Runs, a Marathon. This film you and I both have seen. This is another Sundance film. This is one that I missed my screening of, and I'm so sad. But we're finally seeing it now. This is Amazon Studios. And if you haven't heard of Brittany Runs, a Marathon, it is a comedy drama. It was written and directed by Paul Downs Calaizzo, and this is his first film, though. I think he's like a screenwriter, if I'm not mistaken. Not to be confused, by the way, with Paul Downs. This is Paul Downs Calaizzo, totally different guy.
Yeah, I was confused by that.
Yeah, I as soon as I saw his name, I was like, wait, what? And then in the credits. But yeah, this film stars Jillian Bell, who I believe is a producer on it as well. Michaela Watkins, not to be confused with Annie McDowell, which is something I do. Akash and Bigdar, Lil Rel Howery, and Micah Stock. And it's essentially about this young woman who, she's my age. She's 28. How fun. And she's kind of at this crossroads in her life where she's broke, she's overweight, and she kind of wants to get healthier. But she doesn't have the money to go to a gym. So she just decides to start running. And eventually she wants to challenge herself to the ultimate extreme and train for a marathon, the New York City Marathon. This film is kind of interesting in the sense that it definitely is super Sundance, right? Like it has like a Sundance-y feel to it, but there's some like weird like flourishes here. Like when you're watching it doesn't have like but they made this by their bootstraps feel. Like there's actually some like creative filmmaking going on that could be hit or miss for some people. But what's your overall take on Brittany Runs a Marathon? Do you think she should have just settled for the 10K?
Oh, I think she needs to live up to that title. If they're going to sell me on Brittany running a marathon, you better give me Brittany running that marathon. And thankfully the movie did. Yeah, as far as the movie is concerned, so Amazon spent like $12 million on this, right? Or like something very high.
I don't remember. I think it was like 14 million. I think it was a little higher than that.
Was it 14?
I think so.
Yeah, I remember it was a very, very high price. It was like on par with Late Night.
Yeah, because
like
that was
spending.
Late Night was like 13.
Yeah, so I was pretty surprised. Like when I heard that, I'm like, huh, because the movie didn't get exceptional reviews out of Sundance, and so I was like, I wonder what they're seeing in this film that made them so excited to chop down and give this a wide release. And I can kind of see why it is a crowd pleaser. It is a fairly charming film, and I do think as a showcase for Jillian Bell, who has been playing a lot of supporting roles in the past, but really hasn't had a chance to have her own lead role to shine outside of, I think she had like a Comedy Central show for like a couple seasons where she was the lead, but I don't remember what it was called.
I'm not aware of that.
She's mostly been like, what was that?
I'm definitely not aware of that.
I think it was like something House, if I recall correctly. I didn't end up watching it, but I remember seeing ads for it. But yeah, she does a great job. I think her performance helps to glide some of the patchiness of the story, and I think it does help that her performance does it feels very honest and it feels very real, even when the movie kind of slides into like the Sundance tropes that we were talking about. But at the end of the day, I think the movie, it felt fleeting, I guess, in a way that didn't really hit me as hard as I was hoping it would. Because the stuff in the film, it's talking about stuff that I can relate with and stuff that feels at home to me, but the way that the execution comes out, while you said there's some craftsmanship to the film, it doesn't feel like a particularly stylish movie. And I don't think that the storytelling is that exceptional, because the way that the character beats kind of flow, it feels kind of random when Brittany's character kind of like has like a moment where she kind of lashes out at a different character. It doesn't feel organic to the scene. It just feels like the plot kind of needs her to have this emotional moment. And it doesn't really work, I think, for me, because it kind of retroactively makes Brittany seem like a worse person when it's supposed to be making her seem like more of a flawed character. And I definitely think there's an approach and a way that you can do that feels very honest and true. But I think maybe just because this is the guy's first time making a movie, it just kind of feels a little haphazard when those beats happen. And also, the comedy was very sort of hit and miss with me. I didn't think Brittany's character was quite as funny as the script was hoping she would be. That's not to say she doesn't have funny moments, but it's like a lot of her jokes kind of... I think there is a part sometimes where it's like clear that like her joke is intentionally not supposed to be that funny. But I don't know, it didn't really hit me as hard, I guess, as a film as I was hoping. But I'm going to guess that you had a lot stronger of a response to this film.
Oh, why do you guess that, Will?
Well, is it because you just recently ran a marathon and you felt seen by this film?
Okay, yeah. So I definitely disagree with you on that scene in particular where she lashes out at someone. I actually thought that was...
Oh, I'm not talking about one
made
scene.
A lot of
There's
sense
like three.
Well, the one I think you're talking about where it's a little bit more harsher, like it's a little bit like out of nowhere. And I actually thought about it, and it started to make more sense. I started to think, you know what, Will's not going to like this because this scene takes place in Philadelphia, and it's harsh and on its home state.
Well, no, that wasn't actually the scene I was thinking of. I was thinking of an earlier scene, if anything. But
okay, all right,
yeah, that scene. That felt more honest, but I kind of got what I was going for. But yeah, that definitely, I mean, it didn't win me over as far as Brittany was concerned, but it had similar issues, I'd agree.
Well, see, I agree with the comedy. This isn't a movie I found very funny. I think I maybe laughed once, but I still really liked it. I actually really like this one. I think that it's... And I'm sorry you didn't. I think when I was watching it, I was just so invested in this character and her flaws, and I thought they made a lot of sense. And I thought that her attempts at humor were more interesting and entertaining to me than if they had actually been really good bits of comedy. Because there's a lot in this movie where she tries to be funny and people just kind of roll their eyes at her. And there's a lot of this movie where I just feel like I'm seeing just a person. Like I'm seeing a person who is trying to do something and is trying to achieve something. And I found it pretty inspiring, and it's very shabby around the edges. I don't think a lot of those filmmaking flourishes or all that, they don't do much to add anything. They're just sort of there because you feel like it's the first movie he's directing and feels like he needs to do something a little bit different. And it's fine. Yeah, I think a lot of this movie is just fine. And I think that it pulls off exactly what it's trying to do, which is it's trying to make you feel empathy for people who go through things that maybe we don't always assume are difficult, and we don't always assume are hard. And I was feeling that especially with like, I didn't run a marathon, but I did run my first 10K yesterday. And, first and foremost, the reason is because my girlfriend pushed me to do it, and, she's amazing. But then also I did watch Brittany Runs a Marathon on the night before, and it kind of inspired me to be a little bit more of like, to push myself to do something I hadn't done before. And that's, to me, that is what a great movie can do. Even the bad movies can do that sometimes, where they can just get you, they can inspire you in little ways to improve your life. And I think this is a movie that will probably make a lot of people very happy. It's probably gonna make them feel very good, but not in a dishonest way or in a way that, feels like it's manipulating you, just in a way that's like very true and honest to who this person is. We didn't mention this is based on a real person who kind of went through this thing. Her name is Brittany. And I just can't help but feel like, yeah, this is a movie I would watch again, which makes me feel like, yeah, this is better than I definitely am seeing from you. And I guess I just got out of it a lot of different things that you apparently weren't really looking for, maybe.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I don't think what you're saying is wrong. Like I got that to a sense. I just think it's what it's doing is kind of shallow. Like speaking for me, like there are moments of the film that I found inspirational, but I think only until I left the theater. And to give an example, like when I was driving home, I just went to Taco Bell and I just completely forgot everything that this movie was and what it represented. And it felt like until you brought it up again, like I haven't really thought about this movie. It hasn't really inspired me beyond just being like, wow, maybe I could do something and then not. So to me, that kind of is indicative of what the film ultimately represents, which is just, like you said, fine, but it doesn't really, I think, accomplish all that much. Like, I think it has good intentions. Like, I think it has a winning sort of sweetness to it at points, but I just don't think it really accomplishes more than a kind of short-lived feel-good film. And I would maybe be kinder to that if it wasn't so shabby, like you said. Like if it was a little tighter, and I think the movie was able to kind of patch over some of those flaws that I was talking about. Because even though the movie's only like 105 minutes long, it feels like 130 minutes. Like it's not a well-paced movie. And there's a couple other things that didn't quite work for me. So I get what you're saying. I wish I was as positive as you were on the film, but to me, I just think there's too many things holding it back to really make it work on the whole. And I just think that ultimately it didn't really stick with me enough to want to look over the flaws.
Okay, well, I just disagree. I honestly really do. I don't think that it's shallow. I honestly like the scenes that stuck out to me that really worked for me was this. There are a lot of scenes where there's just this anxiety she has to put herself out there and to like the scene where she's running for the first time and just trying it. And I actually think that's a very well done scene. It's a very, really good way to like show how anxiety works, and it echoes throughout the rest of the film whenever she has those triggers. And it's a really good way to show you like when people misbehave or they do something just kind of atrocious, they do something awful. A lot of the time, it can be predicated by these moments, by these traumas, and the film does this quite a bit. And what I liked about it was that wasn't all of it. It wasn't a downer. It wasn't a film that just made a mockery of the way this woman looks or the way that people who are overweight look. That it really is just like showing like this is what people are like. And if you make that decision that you want to sort of start improving yourself, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be something that takes like when you have like the support of like friends and family, it can be a lot easier when you have a goal in mind. Like these are the things that the film is like saying and doing. And I think all those things are pretty valid and things that you don't get in a lot of movies, because usually when you get like sports movies, they're so vague and they're so ambiguous. They're like, we can do it as a team. We just got to practice. Right. This one was a little bit more realistic. She doesn't become like a marathon runner overnight, obviously, or really like when you get to the points where she's like really pushing herself to her extreme. She's not one of the elite athletes. She doesn't like evolve in like a weird like movie magic sort of way. She's just still a person, and it's like intercutted with these scenes of her being kind of an awful person, and like sometimes like her friends and her family. And what I liked was the way that they just found different ways to make this story come alive a bit, make it feel a little bit more personal, a little bit more interesting. At least that's how I read into it. So by the time it finished, one of the reasons I had been thinking about it is because I just really clicked with who these people were and the relationships between the characters and so on. Again, a lot of the criticisms are still there. I don't think this is a fantastic, amazing, you got to see it right now sort of movie. But if you just want to see something kind of laid back and good, and so something that's going to make you feel a little bit better, and maybe push you to do something to feel better about yourself and your situation, whatever it may be. It can be all kinds of things, not just health and fitness, but if you're trying to like finish a novel, or if you're trying to make a movie, things like that. This movie has that inspirational quality to it. It makes you feel like you can do something if you just start making little simple goals and changes. So yeah, I like this one a bit. I give it a very strong, enthusiastic B.
For Brittany.
B for Brittany. You know me. It's Brittany,
yeah.
bitch.
Yeah. I don't disagree with what you're saying again. I just think, and to be clear, like when I say shallow, I don't mean that what the intentions are shallow. I think what you're saying is true. Like I do think the movie is trying to communicate that. And also to be clear, if anyone does get inspired by this film, I don't want to take that away from them. I think that's the film's intent. And if it works for people, all power to them. And I can see, I guess by being an Amazon film, like it's very accessible to watching it on Prime. Like I could see people kind of casually be like, oh, you know, like this is on Prime, watching it. It's well made, or it's like glossy enough that it looks nice, but it's not cinematic enough that it wouldn't look bad if you didn't see it outside the theater. So I in that sense, I think that maybe was why Amazon Prime picked it up. But as a film, yeah, I just didn't quite think what you're talking about worked in that sense. Like I think that's intent. I just think that it's shallow in the sense that it only accomplished that to a point. And I am glad that, you know, like you said, a lot of films don't really communicate these themes in a pretty human and real way. And I applaud the film for trying to do that. But I just felt like a lot of times when I did try to communicate that, it felt artificial. Or when I tried to communicate that in a narrative point, the filmmaking wasn't strong enough to make that feel authentic or to really capture that feeling in a way that made Brittany truly feel whole. But I do think Jillian Bell's performance is why why Brittany feels a little more alive in spite of the film's shortcomings. So yeah, I'm going to give it a C+. It's not really a film that I feel like I'm not super negative on it. I became more negative because I'm not quite as positive as you are, but it's fine. Like I could definitely see people enjoying it. It's totally harmless as a film is concerned, but ultimately I think what holds it back is a little too much for me to give it a passing grade.
All right, well, that's Brittany Runs a Marathon, a film that I liked that you were a little bit more mixed on. And I think, honestly, we could just say it. The reason is because Tobey Maguire produced it, and no, you don't like Tobey Maguire, and that's fine. That's fine.
What? No.
Mr.
I'm the one that always champions Spider-Man 3.
Yeah.
Get out of here with this noise.
So, I looked it up. The series you were talking about that Jillian Bell is in is Idiot Sitter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I knew it was something with a house. So, that's the show.
Yeah, it didn't last very long, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah, I didn't say it did.
Okay, so that'll do it for all of our reviews, except for our main review. We're finally going to get into It, Chapter 2.
I know your secret, your dirty little secret. Oh, I know your secret, your dirty little secret.
It Chapter 2 is, of course, the follow-up to It from 2017, where both films are an out-of-order adaptation of Stephen King's novel of the same name from 1986. In the first film, which we reviewed on the show just 2 years ago, a group of preteens in 1989 who call themselves the Losers Club encounter a supernatural force of evil dressed up as a clown named Pennywise, played by Bill Skarsgård in both films, and they band together to seemingly defeat him in the previous movie. In It Chapter 2, 27 years have passed, and all of those children have become adults, played by James McAvoy as Bill, the leader of the group, who is now a novelist in Los Angeles. Hint, hint. Jessica Chastain plays Beverly, the only female member of the group. She's undergone abuse and trauma, both as a child and now as a wife to an abusive husband. Bill Hader is Richie, the snarky wisecracker who's gone on to become a famous comedian. Jay Ryan is Ben, who is the kid in the group who's gone on to become a successful architect. The new kid in the group, I meant to say. James Ransom as Eddie. He is the germaphobe character who's now married to a woman just like his mother. And I should say, of all of the casting choices, James Ransom is really is a dead ringer for the kid actor who played him, Jack Dylan Grazer, who was just in 100%. Shazam. Oh my gosh, yeah. There's a scene where like their faces trans over time or whatever, and you're just like, whoa, is that him? And then finally, Isaiah Mustafa plays Mike, the only member of the group who stayed behind in their creepy town of Derry to keep an eye on Pennywise's inevitable return. It's a good thing he does, because as we learn in the film, moving away from dairy actually inhibits your ability to remember many of your childhood experiences there. And as Mike calls the group back together, except for Stanley, who decides to stay behind, they reminisce and catch up, but ultimately begin to recall the unspeakable horrors they dealt with as children, involving both Pennywise and the torment and horrors they tolerated from the people of the town.
I crashed my car.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Man, I hear you. I mean, my heart was literally like pounding right out of my chest.
I thought it was only me.
It was like pure fear. It's fear. Why'd we all feel like that, Mike?
You remember something we don't you, Mike?
Something happens to you when you leave this town. Farther away, the hazier it all gets. But me, I never left. So yeah, I remember all of it.
Pennywise.
From there, the film is essentially a one last mission to defeat Pennywise once and for all in order to prevent the deaths of more children in this never-ending cycle of evil. And boy, Will Ashton, does this film feel like it's never-ending. I cannot believe how long this movie was, and it was hard. It was hard for me not to walk out at certain points. Not that I hate this film or anything like that. There were just parts where I was like, I think I got it. Like, I think I get it. Like, I think I've got everything this film can do. But I stayed in my seat because I knew we would talk about it. And Will, what did you think of It Chapter 2? And remind us, what did you think of the first film?
Yeah, so I guess I don't want to say too much on your behalf too early on, but I'm basically, of the two of us, the Stephen King fan. I really enjoy his books. I've read more than a handful, and I like him. I think he's a good writer. I don't think he's perfect by any means. I think his kind of workman style of writing can produce some kind of unsatisfactory endings, as the movie points out as nauseum. But and obviously he also makes some books that aren't very great sometimes. But I think at his best, he really communicates a lot of things that I think a lot of people take for granted, as far as, because he's a mainstream writer and has like earned so much acclaim and success, that I think his books have more merit and have more thematic grounds than some people take for, I think people consider. But as far as this film was concerned, relating to the first It, I enjoyed it. I definitely liked it more as a kind of fun haunted house ride than a proper and true adaptation of the book. It definitely kind of had like this Goonies, Monster Squad, Stand By Me vibe that it almost felt like a paché at times, especially as I was rewatching the film. But I think there's enough heart and enough sincerity with the camaraderie with the kids that it really helped. And I do think there was a lot of inspiration in the visual style from what they were able to glean from the book and kind of translate that into the film, that it was fun. I enjoyed it. It was heartfelt, and I was excited to see the second film. And as far as Chapter 2 is concerned, I think I admire in some ways this movie even more because it's doing the big swing. Like, it's going out there as far as style is concerned. It has a lot of like weird stuff in it that was communicated from the book, or at least influenced by the book. And I do think that having the story kind of interweaved with the childhood segments makes this feel more like a proper adaptation of the Stephen King book, because the book goes back and forth a lot between the kid segments and the adult moments. So in that sense, it kind of felt like a more proper adaptation of the book, at least for the first half. And then I think there's a point where they add this idea of like, oh, we have to find this memorabilia that we can sacrifice. And that's where I think the film kind of falters, because that's the point where the film kind of gets very repetitive, because it has like all the characters kind of finding themselves interacting with Pennywise again, and the structure of each scene has a kind of similar style and kind of similar rhythm, to the point where I think that's the reason why the film feels so long, beyond just being nearly 3 hours, that it has this kind of repetitious style that by the time we get to what should be a very emotional and climactic endpoint, you're kind of exhausted and tired by having kind of seen a similar kind of style of film over and over and over again. And that's ultimately a flaw of the pacing. And I think I don't know if that's a choice that they made that ultimately works in the movie's benefactor, but I do really enjoy the performances here. I don't think the chemistry is quite as good as as it was with the kids, But I think there's a lot to be admired from the casting here. I think Bill Hader particularly is good. The guy who played Adult Eddie was good. Isaiah Mufasa was Mike Hanlon, I believe.
I was gonna say so. I agree. Bill Hader, Isaiah Musafa, and James Ranson are like the three who I felt a little bit more like, yeah, like they're the grown up versions of those kids, and the way they sort of get along with each other. It reminded me, because when you see James McAvoy playing Bill, it kind of just I could never stop seeing James McAvoy, honestly.
I thought he was a bit miscast. That's the only one that I felt was kind of off. As far as I think he's a tremendous actor, and I championed a lot his performance in Glass this year, which I don't think is a great film, but I think he's very good in it. I think it just never quite fit right. I get he's like a big star, so they picked him. Maybe I'm a little bitter because I thought Zach Woods, when I heard that he was like a dead ringer for the kid version of Bill, I was like,
that would have been amazing.
But he's not.
And I'm a little burnt. Not yet. I'm a little burnt that Jessica Chastain plays Bev. She does a great job. Jessica Chastain is a fantastic actress. You see Sophia Lillis, the kid version, and you're just like, Amy Adams. Where is Amy Adams? And it's just like, how could they not get Amy Adams for this? It's very strange to me because the first It was one of the most successful R-rated horror films of all time. If you don't adjust for inflation, I think it's the most box office wise most successful one of all time. And yeah, it just bums me out a little bit they couldn't get Amy Adams, but not to say anything negative about Chastain, of course.
I actually thought that casting was pretty spot on. I thought, in addition to her having a working relationship
ridiculous
with, Andy Mozaki, is that how you pronounce the director's last name? Or Mazakuski?
Machete.
Machete? Okay.
It's Andy Machete, yeah.
Oh, no wonder he's a horror director. But yeah, so I thought the casting for her was good. I just thought they weirdly underused adult Beverly in this film. Like, I thought she was such a standout in the original film, not merely for the performance, but I thought, her character was definitely a pivotal part of that relationship. And I thought the way she interacted with the adults, definitely established that, she was like kind of a little more level-headed and like kind of able to add something that, the other guys couldn't. And in this movie, she just was like kind of there a lot of the time. Like, I thought it was very weird that you have
she's kind of like Jean Grey almost.
Talented. What's that? Oh, like Jean Grey.
She reminded me a lot of movies? Like Jean Grey. Yeah. Yeah. Or like in the X-Men comics too, but like, which is kind of ironic coincidental considering Dark Phoenix. But yeah, just like that sort of, she's just sort of there in the background. There's not much to her character in like not the Jean Grey Phoenix version where she's like, more interesting, but yeah, she just feels sort of like there to look redheaded.
Right. And that's something that is ultimately a flaw of the films. Cause in the book, she obviously, like the character of Beverly plays a big part in, defeating Pennywise and also being there for the group. And yeah, it was very weird that like she is like such a big name. Beverly played such a big part in the last film, and then in this movie she's just kind of there. And I don't know what that says.
She's reactionary. Yeah. I think that's the word. Right.
But yeah, I mean, as a film, to kind of tie back to what I was trying to say, I think it's as a blockbuster horror film, which I don't think we usually get. Like, we don't ever really get a horror movie of this scope and scale, Stephen King adaptation or otherwise. There is something kind of thrilling about just seeing a huge $100 million straight horror movie. Like the things that they're able to accomplish as far as set pieces and special effects and just the scope and scale of the film feels very cinematic. To spend 3 hours in a kind of warped version of Stephen King's book, I enjoyed it. I had fun with it, but to me, by the end of it, what should have been a very emotionally affecting moment just ran kind of hollow for me. And it just felt like after 305 minutes of these films, I really didn't get the emotion that was so pivotal to the book. And I felt like the themes that book was able to communicate about trauma and community and, where you come from and the lingering kind of ripple effects of trauma, it didn't quite match that. And I think that leaves it a little disappointing in the grand scheme of things. But As a film, it was fine. I enjoyed it in that sense. Just as a piece of blockbuster entertainment, I mean.
So it wasn't $100 million to make. It was the estimates are between 60 and 79 million. But I mean, your point is taken. Yeah, it was a pretty big budget by horror film standards, right? Horror films are famously, typically used on the cheap or made on the cheap.
Right.
Yeah. So if you don't remember from when we talked about the first It, I really didn't care for that one. And I actually re-listened to our conversation about it the other day, and I have a lot of the same criticisms for this movie than I do for the first one, which is, just to reiterate exactly what you said, the repetition of the scenes. It just gets to the point where you see the same thing happen over and over again, so there's no tension. There's no, like, you're not really scared for these characters as much, and that's a big problem for your horror movie, especially when your horror movie is 169 minutes. And that said, I still found myself slightly liking this more. Maybe there was something about the production design that I found a little bit more compelling in this one. Probably my favorite Pennywise scene out of all of the Pennywise scenes in these two movies is in this one, which involves him kind of like trying to eat this little girl. This movie, though, it has like these little moments of just like weird awfulness that doesn't jive with the rest of the film. Especially there's this opening scene that involves a very homophobic gay bashing scene that I understand the intent. The purpose of it is to sort of like peel back the layers of Derry as this idyllic town. And like on the surface, it looks amazing. Look at this carnival. Look at all these people having a great time. But then like under the surface, you have these horrible, violent people. And then even further, you have this murderous clown. But the way that the scene happens and then the way that it's never really addressed again rubbed me completely the wrong way. It just felt like completely inelegant to me. What do you mean is that true? Those characters are never mentioned or heard.
Yeah, no, Mike brings them up at least twice. I mean, it's not like they come back.
But there's
and then he comes back to.
There's no
Bill.
catharsis for it. There's no catharsis whatsoever for it.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens with a lot of the kids who are eaten. There's no reckoning to it. The movie just sort of, not to give away how everything turns out. A lot of violence and a lot of awful stuff happens. And the movie just seems way more interested in other things. And it to me, like if you were watching this film and you lived with that reality of being somebody who can't even like go to a carnival with the person you love, I could see this film completely like just feeling completely callous toward a true horror that you have in your life in a way that just feels like it's only serving like a pretty minor plot point. So that's all I'm saying is like, I think somebody could easily walk away from it, definitely having that range of emotion, just feeling like, what was the point of that? Like, why did you make me go through something like that? So that's why I bring it up. And then I'd also say the thing, though, that this movie does do better than the first, in my opinion, and I think some people will disagree with this. I think some people will watch this movie and be like, I like the kids better. But I actually agree with you. The way that it intercuts with the kids is more interesting to me as a story. It's more interesting to see adults revisit the horrors of their childhood. And like that to me is like thematically interesting. That's more of like when you're watching the first It just felt like, man, I've seen this so many times. I've seen Stand By Me. I've seen the Stranger Things kids get up to nonsense on their bikes. But this movie actually has like a more interesting way into that, which clicks more with, because I haven't read the book, but it clicks more into what I think probably made the book so compelling for a lot of people. It wasn't just like a kids versus monster movie. It was a, isn't it awful to go back to your hometown? Isn't it weird? Doesn't it make you feel things that are like a mix of anxiety and dread, but also jubilance and reconnection? That's not to say this movie is like amazing at tackling all of those themes, but at least it has them. Whereas like the first one, I just felt like it was a really long movie about trying to defeat a clown, and the rules don't make a lot of sense. And like there's just so many moments where I don't understand what the point of Pennywise is. Like I don't understand why he's playing around with them, why he just there's a lot of like ways that he's able to like bend the rules of physics and all of that just, it doesn't have to be overly explained. Like we don't need like a exposition to like and we'd get some of that, but we don't need like a detailed analysis of like how Pennywise's powers work. We just need it to be sort of more consistent so you can get a sense of the danger and you can get a sense of like, oh, he's in trouble right now because of this rule that's been established. There's none of that here, though. It just always presented as Pennywise is going to show up. He's going to scare you for a bit. Don't freak out. It's going to end. You're going to find some way out of it, and it's not really going to make sense, but it's fine. And that to me was the thing that was really lacking in this one that I was really hoping they would fix from the first movie. So that's kind of my general take. Yeah.
I mean, I do think they do address Adrian later in the film, so I don't agree that it never comes up again, but I do agree with you in the sense that the scenes like that, and the reason why I think the book is so long, besides being the fact that Stephen King was coked out of his mind when he wrote it, it was very clearly about the lingering effects, like how the years like impact these characters, and like feeling, like how they were able to kind of deal with or reckon with like these consequences, and you feel that length, and you feel that in a good way. Like you see the layers that come with trauma, and I think that is why the book is so affecting in spite of many of its shortcomings. And this movie, I don't mind that it's 3 hours long, but I just think that without those consequences, without really delving into that too deeply, and instead having like a bunch of set pieces that kind of get repetitive after a point, that doesn't really justify making the film 3 hours. And I mean, if you can, I'm not really against the movie being 3 hours, because like if we can have a 3 hour Avengers movie, we can have a 3 hour Stephen King adaptation as far as I'm concerned. But I just wish the movie was able to be a little meatier if it was going to be this long. I just wish that it was able to communicate a lot of the thoughtfulness that's in the book rather than just repeating a lot of the same points over and over again, in a point that makes the story seem thinner than it really is. And yeah, that to me is what disappoints me about this film as far as like a kind of final chapter to the story. I think there was a lot of potential here to really expand upon that and kind of be on that book's level. And ultimately, it kind of took a lot of the problems that were in the first movie and expunged them into a bigger issue. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, just watching it as a like horror romp, I enjoyed it. Like, I think it's pretty well made as far as the like cinematography and some of the direction, I think, and some of the art direction, I think is really compelling. And like you said, like, I think the sets are really great. But yeah, I just think it had to either really delve into some of the serious nitty gritty stuff of the book, or it had to refrain and not have as many set pieces and stuff. And the movie seems like it's kind of at a standstill in that regard. And I think ultimately that's what kept me from really thinking this movie was on the same level as the book. But yeah, as far as an adaptation, or just not even as an adaptation, just as a studio horror film of this scale and magnitude, there is something undeniably fun about seeing a horror movie this huge and decently well made, with I think some pretty strong performances. I think it gets kind of easy to overlook that I think Bill Skarsgård's performance in this film is even a little stronger than it was in the last film. Maybe because we get to see him do a little bit more. Yeah, I think because you get to see him do a little bit more than just kind of be in the background. But yeah, I thought his performance was pretty impressive, and I was I enjoyed it in that sense. But I agree with all your points as far as why this film doesn't quite have the emotional impact I think it deserves.
And I think a lot of that is just, there's a different way to do this movie. I think there's a way to pace these scenes together so that, for example, like what they could have done to make it more digestible as a 3 hour movie would be to take those same scenes and not, and intercut them a little bit more, edit them together a little bit more so that you get that sense of like dread is happening to everyone except instead of having it be like, all right, here's Beverly's thing, and all right, here is Eddie's thing, all right, here's Rich. Right. And I have to say, so I agree 100% with Bill Skarsgård in here. I think that he should be tremendously proud of himself. He has taken a somewhat iconic character thanks to Tim Curry and turned him into like the horror icon character of the decade. I think that, I'd say that the clown from Tim Curry was like, I don't know if if he's really like on that level in the 90s, so I don't want to overspeak it. But yeah,
I'm not talking about
definitely
the Tim
think
Curry ones exactly, but I mean, just like the character in the book, I think was pretty iconic to begin with. But yeah, I get what you're saying. As a
right.
film,
So what I'm saying here,
as like a
as
Freddie
a film
Mercury
icon,
or not Freddie Mercury, Freddy Krueger.
or Freddie Mercury. Jeez.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Sorry.
Exactly. Yes. The Freddy Krueger
Krueger
of this decade. Yes.
Yeah.
And he does that by hamming up the performance and showing like a range of like just these like chilling reactions and just like a lot of send ups to old Stephen King films. You know, there's a lot of like imagery and direct references to those things, and it all pretty much works. I'd say that the only character though who I wanted to know more of and I wanted to spend a lot more time with was honestly Bill Hader, and I think a lot of that has to do with what I like about this film, and I don't think I said this in the last one, but I do remember just kind of, for the last film, I do remember just being like, I like this Richie character. I think he's interesting. There's something underneath the surface, and you know, he's kind of the loudmouth, you know, and it makes sense that he goes on to be like who Bill Hader is, and they do something different with this character that I wasn't expecting, and they're sort of exploring like why he is the way he is. And I wish we had gotten a little bit more of that, but we can't because we have like 12 other characters we have to get to. And not all of them are as interesting. I'd say, so Ben in this movie, I was really let down. I just thought he was like, again, he and Bev are basically Jean Grey and Cyclops. Like they're just vanilla and ice. Like there's just nothing like, I don't know, like whenever they were like talking to each other, it just all felt very, very dry to me. It all felt very lifeless. I didn't understand like why these people were friends in the first place. Whereas like I could see Richie and Eddie and Mike and Bill to some extent and Stanley being friends. But then like, yeah, like for whatever reason, I just had a harder time getting why Ben is here and why this whole thing with like the love triangle. And I don't know, a lot of it was just very messy, I guess. And I think a lot of it could have been solved if you just cast Amy Adams as Beverly, and I'm not going to get off that hill. You can stab me all you want. But yeah, that's it. Chapter 2. Do you have any final thoughts to add before we grade this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying though about Ben. I mean, I thought the performance was fine. I do agree though they don't. I think Kid Ben and Kid Beverly have chemistry. But it's just not there between Jessica Chastain and I forget the guy's name who plays Ben in this. But,
Jay Ryan.
Jay Ryan, yeah, because I know he's like an Australian actor, right, or New Zealand. He's not as famous in the States, but like he was on a lot. I'm not
sure. I think he's a soap opera guy, right? Yeah,
right. I think So, but yeah, I don't know which one it is. I don't want to misquote, but yeah, I do think. Unfortunately, that lack of chemistry is pretty crucial to the final moments not really working for me. I don't think their performances are bad per se, but it doesn't feel like their romance is true in a way that I think it should have. And also the movie weirdly undercuts a lot of the stuff with Bill that I didn't quite get. Like, for instance, like his wife in this is practically non-existent. And I felt like that was kind of crucial.
He completely forgets about
triangle. Her. Yeah. And it was like very odd.
Yeah,
because I felt like that could have like if they had that in the film, that would justify the 3-hour length instead of just doing the like Hall of Mirror thing over and over again. Basically, one case literally a Hall of Mirrors. But yeah, I don't know why they took that out, and I think that would have made more sense as far as the love triangle if they had like if they did take that out, maybe make it more of a conflict between the characters because they just like it feels kind of obligatory in a way that it didn't really make sense to me. So. Yeah, there is like just a general kind of messiness to this adaptation that unfortunately doesn't quite make it as good as I think as it should have been, especially compared to what people were expecting after that last film. But I still enjoyed it. Like I had fun. It's easy to criticize the film, and I do agree with you about Richie. I think without getting too without spoiling what you're loosely referring to, if maybe they had tied Richie into the opening a little bit more, that might have made it a little more resonant in a way that didn't feel cheap, as you were suggesting. I think maybe there's something to that they could have done. I think they kind of hint at it, having Adrian in Bill's scene, but yeah, ultimately, there's something here. I think there's a stronger film that could have come out. It just feels like they kind of got lost in the shuffle. And that's a bit of a shame because I think there's a lot to admire in what Stephen King wrote in his book. And that's not to say it's a bad adaptation. I think it's fine. And I did enjoy that he got like a Stan Lee cameo in this. I don't know how you felt about that, but I thought it was kind of fun.
It's fine. Little on the nose, but whatever. We'll take it.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know. Like, I mean, when he criticized his own endings, I could see him counting his cash, his paycheck behind his desk. But in any case, yeah, I give it a B-. I enjoyed it, but the more I think about it, I think the more I realize that this kind of felt like missed potential as far as this film was concerned.
Sure, yeah. I'm a C+, and that's higher than the last one. I was a C on the first It, because that film just really left me not feeling what I wanted to feel. Not just in terms of like wanting to be scared, but just, there's all this stuff about like how these kids love each other and they're so close. And I thought that was brought to a little bit more interesting light in this one, but I can't watch this film and say that I think that it's very good. It's one of those movies that's good because of how bad it is almost. And I could see a lot of people liking how bad it is and liking how good it is at the same time. It's like a weird paradox of things. And obviously there are good things in it. I'm not trashing it and whatsoever. I just think that it comes together in a very weird package, and I wish that we could have watched this streaming. Honestly, I hate to be sacrilegious against the cinema, but yeah, for that 3 hours, like I couldn't help but be like, man, no wonder they did a mini series, right? Because you can see how in a mini series, like everybody gets an episode, and that's kind of a nice way to handle it. And in this one, when you cram it all together, you lose so much because of that.
Yeah, no, I was thinking something similar. Like as I was watching this film, and I was watching, because I also for the first time watched the 1990 version, because I never got around to watching that before. And yeah, I definitely think like if they had somehow found a way to like make it maybe like a 12-hour miniseries, and like something on Netflix where you could watch it like in 12 installments or something, and really kind of got into the nitty gritty of it, that would have probably been the more beneficial adaptation of this. But like I said earlier, I really do admire that this film is so cinematic. Like, it feels very big. It feels very grandiose in a way that we just don't often see with horror movies, or horror movies aren't often allowed to be, given their budget restrictions most of the time. So that's, I think, something that really strikes me as fun and admirable about this film. And I do applaud, like I said, that the director, Andy Machete, you said his name was? He was able to really just, he had the budget here, and I don't think he wasted it. Like, I think he really went big on the scale of this, and he really went out there in some of the ideas. And yeah, I enjoyed that the film, it has kind of like this like bigger, kind of more out there, outlandish approach. And I also, in certain key moments was reminiscent of Sam Raimi as far as like his kind of more outlandish style. Oh, and, if you remind me of Sam Raimi, that's always a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one of those movies where, there's like gags that show up in the scary scenes, which I'm honest, I was fine with, because at least it broke up the repetition. Yes. All right, well, that's It Chapter 2, a film that I'm pretty mixed on, but I'm glad you found a little bit more enjoyment out of.
So should we talk about Peter Bogdanovich's cameo in this movie? Did you
go ahead?
No, I just like, I am very tickled that he's, one, in this movie, and two, that this movie lives in a world where Peter Bogdanovich is still making big studio movies.
Yeah.
Something about that was, I was like, I kind of want to live in that world, but at the same time, I have to live in a world where a killer clown is going around killing people. So, you gotta weigh your options, I guess.
Also, isn't the guy who played the young version of Ben in the miniseries, isn't he in this movie at one point? I think I heard something about that.
Maybe. I have to look it up. I didn't see him, but I don't know what he looks like as an
TBD
adult.
on that. But yeah, when Bogdanovich like comes down on like the seat, I was like, am I seeing things? Like, it was a little bit. I almost was like too. I was like looking at the character's wife, the actress, and I was like, is she supposed to be somebody? But I can't recognize her with all the.
It's Jess Wexler from Teeth. Jess Wexler from Teeth.
Oh, I haven't seen Teeth. No.
Maverick's favorite film. Yeah, I was excited because like I knew Audra plays a big part in the book, and I was like, oh, Jess Wexler's playing this part. She's gonna get a big part in the horror movie. That's great. And then she didn't show up ever again. And I was like, oh.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's It Chapter 2. Next week, we're going to be talking about The Goldfinch and Hustlers. Both films hit wide release. We're going to try to see both of them so we can talk about them on the show. At least one of them, but I think I definitely want to see both. It's going to be tough because I think Goldfinch is really long because the book is pretty long. So, man, all these Hollywood movies, well, they're just too long for us. I wish we'd get some leaning ones. We didn't appreciate Ready or Not when we had it.
Yeah, it is weird, though, that Warner Brothers is releasing two movies back, like, two same weekends based on long books dealing with the emotional resonance of trauma involving Finn Woodward. Like, I don't know what's the coincidence there.
That was a good... All right, yeah, that was a good combination there. Well done.
Yeah.
All right, that'll do it for us this week on Cinemaholics. Thanks as always for listening. Links to everything in our social media and all of that is in the show notes. And don't forget, you can send us an email, do all that stuff. Again, all that information is in the show notes. We'll see you next week from the Internet California. I'm John Negroni.
And for the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
See you next time.